Hello and welcome everybody to episode 6 of the DDL show. That's where we decode data leadership. I'm your host, Shashanka, CTO and co-founder at Acral Data and founder of the Data Hub project. And today we have on the show an exceptional person, Max Illis, who's a senior principal product manager leading data and AI initiatives at OVO Energy. Max has had a storied career in data, and we're going to talk all about it, all the way from hotels.com and Expedia to, a super large British energy company. What I found interesting about Max, though, is not all of his data journeys, but actually his off-data journeys. So Max enjoys scuba diving, dog walking, and gardening, which are, pretty reasonable activities, I think, for people. But also has an official accreditation from the Academy of Cheese. So Max, tell us everything about that first before we talk about data. But we would love to understand how you got to where you got to, both from a getting to the cheese perspective and also from your journey in data perspective. And for the audience, keep it interactive. Please ask us questions. We're going to take them at the end of the show and respond to you in comments as well. Over to you, Max.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shashanka. It's a pleasure to be on the show today. To talk a little bit about cheese first. Why not? I always had a bit of a passion for cheese, and a few years ago, I was bought a present to do a level 1 accreditation with the Academy of Cheese, which was a great introduction to really understand more about the whole cheese producing fabrication process. We got to taste a lot of cheeses. And this was kind of my last outing, social outing I did before the COVID lockdown. So certainly my love of cheese has persisted and has only grown since doing that. But we're here really to talk about data. So before joining hotels.com, I had quite a long and varied career in finance. Various different roles at different types of companies, but all around data in one form or another. And then back in about 2016, I had the opportunity to join hotels.com and took over as my sort of first product role there was really our streaming ingestion platform. So working on some fairly new technologies around Kafka deployed in the cloud with a great focus on, distributed cloud computing for data.
Max, if I remember correctly, I think 2016 or 2017 is when we first met, right?
Exactly. So that's when I started getting kind of an interest in metadata and came across a paper called the Ground Paper on Metadata. It was published, I think, on the CEDA website. And that's when I thought, why not reach out, say hello, and see if we had something in common to talk about. And we did, and we ran a metadata meetup for, I think a couple of years, met some like-minded people. And I think we've been talking pretty frequently since then.
Yeah, I think the Ground paper was quite interesting because it was one of the first collaboration attempts between industry. So LinkedIn and a few other companies collaborated with, Joe Hellerstein, who was obviously at Berkeley, and their lab, and we kind of worked together on writing about metadata taught from first principles. And that paper is still widely cited in metadata circles. So that was, I thought, quite interesting as I was reflecting on knowing you over the last few years. Our first meeting was about metadata. But tell us about your journey from hotels.com, where you were managing streaming ingestion and all of the stuff that central data platform teams do, to what happened next.
Thanks, Shashanka. Yeah, so from managing the streaming ingestion platform, that kind of extended out to encompass what we call our big data engineering platform, so building tooling and capabilities for our data engineers. Fantastic opportunity. We contributed and developed a lot of open source technology, extended beyond that into our analytics platform, so supporting our analysts from fairly simple, more spreadsheet based, up to much more sophisticated advanced analytics capabilities, and then on to data science and machine learning. Also picked up real-time anomaly detection at that time, which was a fascinating topic I'm still kind of interested in. And then hotels.com is part of the wider Expedia group, as I'm sure many people will know. Around about that time, there was a sort of a reorganization of how Expedia ran its brands. and I moved across into the wider Expedia group to product manage various capabilities across the platform. A bit of streaming, a lot of metadata at the time. I think we were talking again around about that time. Compute, and then I ended up product managing the data lake and the analytics platform at Expedia, and that was for really a very large company, a vast amount of data, highly complex organization. I then worked briefly at Wayfair.com a couple of years ago, and then through a connection of mine from hotels.com days, joined OVO Energy in about November 2022. And I've been working at OVO Energy since then.
Very interesting. So I can relate to a lot of the stuff that you've done in the first part of your career, where you were part of a big company with a big online presence. The data is usually the lifeblood of companies like that. It drives product, and that obviously leads to a ton of innovation in the stack. You're hungry for data. Always looking to democratize and make good use of data. And then I'm very curious on the energy side of things, as you're part of a big behemoth. What are the things that you're seeing are common across these two verticals in terms of how data gets produced, right? How do you go from kind of raw ingredients all the way to data or insights?
Yeah, I haven't found my dream job working in data for a cheese company yet, but you never know. So OVO is a very interesting company. It's an energy company in the UK. I'm sure some of the listeners here aren't familiar with OVO, but we are, I guess, not a vertically integrated energy company, so we don't have any generation capabilities ourselves. So we really look after the customer's journey from usage, so the metering side of things, through to the bill generation and all of that kind of support operation that goes around all of that. We are on a mission to decarbonize energy usage as much as possible. So we're developing significant capabilities around solar panels, air source heat pumps, electric vehicle charging, and smart thermostats, all with a view to reducing our customers' carbon footprint. So our mission is powering human progress with clean, affordable energy for everyone. And energy makes up about 20% of a typical household's carbon footprint. So there's a significant opportunity for us to make to contribute to sort of greener or carbon zero living. And that's one of the things that really attracted me to OVO as a company, but also there were some interesting data challenges that we wanted to solve here. And so reflecting a little bit on some of the work I've done over the last 18 months or so at OVO Energy, there's definitely some areas of commonality across some of the work we did at Expedia, despite being very different organizations. Maybe to put that into a little bit of context, Expedia is travel business. They compete, in a way, per transaction with other booking platforms. So Booking.com is, one of the significant rivals there. But energy in the UK is more of a subscription-based business. So you sign up for your energy supplier. So we have a slightly different, I guess, approach to our customers, but a huge reliance around data with all, I guess, common challenges around, for example, discoverability. Finding the right data. Is it reliable? Do you have the right observability over your data? Governance around it, ownership, and then of course that requires an awful lot of metadata across an awful lot of data to do. So that was certainly one of the areas where I think common challenges to solve across the two types of companies.
So discovery, quality, governance, the usual three things that we end up running into everywhere.
Absolutely.
Very interesting.
And,
go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, as looking at the data teams at the different organizations, there are still, there's still a lot of there are other areas of similarity in terms of, and I think this is a perennial problem across data teams, is measuring return on investment, from an organization perspective. How much money do you put into a data org? what are the structures? Is it a distributed data org or a centralized data org? So measuring that return on that investment is, I think a challenge. And I think it's perhaps it's more of a challenge at a bigger company because you're a little bit more divorced, a little bit further away from that revenue generating layer of the organization. And what's one of the things I think OVO Energy is really very, very good at is putting data very close to that revenue generation piece. And so we can pretty accurately measure the impact we have across the organization.
That is very interesting to hear. In fact, the last conversation we had with Kapil, who's a VP of engineering at LinkedIn, we talked a lot about even the data team's journey there, and really this common trend of even for tech forward companies to essentially start off with a more centralized data aware team, semantics aware team, and then over time have that centralization kind of split up into moving data science and data analysis and data productification closer and closer to where the application lives. So if you've got an application that's making the carbon footprint of consumers easy to understand and discover, home the data scientists with that specific team, and then leave the infrastructure and platformization of how you find data and how you make data more discoverable to maybe a central team. Like they may probably make this decision for what tools are we going to use, what platforms are we going to depend on, but really move semantic aware data processing as close to the system where data is getting generated or consumed in the first place. This trend seems to be a common trend, and we're seeing a lot of success where companies are doing this. So shall we talk about data mesh then?
Yeah, I was going to say that this sounds very much like the beginnings of a data mesh conversation. And I think that's maybe there's the healthy tension between that sort of centralized capability in your data tech stack and all the knowledge you need really around that, plus the subject matter expertise you need both on the kind of that producer side of it, because they understand the nuances of the data. They can help generate, the metadata, have those governance processes, build those data products. But within that kind of domain, you also need to, how do I use this data? What is the analytics that's going to drive the product decisions? What are the ML and AI products that are going to help with that customer journey or that customer experience around it? What insights we can generate? And, for OVO, it's helping our customers move onto that path to zero. So I think I've been a big fan around data mesh. I think back to what we were looking at Expedia, we were, I think, pretty early to adopt a sort of domain-oriented design for how we organize ourselves within the group. And so when the data mesh proposal, became more widely known, it was, I think, very easy for us to go, yeah, we recognize this. This makes a lot of sense. And I was fortunate enough to go on a workshop with Zhamak Darghani in the fairly early days of data mesh. I've been a big proponent around it. What I have learned is it's easier said than done. It is a challenge. I think it's not a cheap thing to implement. It does take investment, it does take training, and it does take commitment. So I think that a full-on implementation of data mesh is a challenge. However, I think there is a roadmap, there are stepping stones towards that, and that's what the approach we're really taking consciously at OVO Energy at the moment.
So one of the things I can relate to a lot is I sort of have this ringside view of data evolution at a lot of different companies, and so I can kind of see that just through my conversations with the Data Hub community. Like I remember early days, 2020, early 2021, the Expedia team, your team, was actually collaborating very closely with the Data Hub project. In fact, a bunch of the concepts in the Data Hub project, like the whole ML modeling, so the ability to represent ML concepts like models and model groups and features, all of that was really a very tight collaborative project that we ran with your team. And so even early on, we noticed that the Expedia team actually had a very strong sense of AI and data, they're the same thing. Metadata for AI, pretty much the same thing. So let's actually have one platform that can represent these concepts in a uniform way and then build connections across things. And now that I'm collaborating with you as part of Acryl, I'm able to kind of see that progression almost in the thinking from the early days where we were all thinking about more the technical assets, like here's a data set, here's a table, here's an ML model, and we're starting to, in addition to representing technical concepts well, also starting to talk about representing logical concepts well. And one of the things I've noticed that has stayed constant between those conversations and at least success stories in those implementations is the more tech-forward teams are taking this approach of, the UI is great. Let's have people find a delightful user experience, but we need APIs that work and are integratable into my entire data stack. We need a system that can embrace shift left principles, and we want to be able to check in, metadata as code and version it the same way. And that then, in a very interesting way, solves two problems. One, developers are made aware of what their responsibilities are. So it kind of acts as just-in-time education, right? When you're filling out that schema, if the IDE is prompting you for what else you need to be putting in, or the linters are doing the right thing. And second, you get to get good quality metadata from the get-go. And so it kind of kills or it feeds two birds with one stone, right? I don't know if you've noticed that as well as you've kind of looked at different data implementations throughout your career.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got a couple of good examples, I think, of this. Back at Expedia, we were using a query engine from a company called Dremio, which had a very nice user experience where we could expose our data sets in a really fairly simple to understand, simple to comprehend manner. But it required a little bit of configuration work, and you could do that through the UI. But very rapidly, we realized that the people who had the knowledge of how to represent that data were the people actually building it. They're really the data engineers or data infrastructure engineering, data product engineering. And so what we want to do is really embed that kind of presentation layer work, so that metadata, the descriptions and other metadata around that data into that data product development process. So we built into our deployment pipelines initially just the ability to push kind of a stub of a markdown file out as a data description with a view that we would go into the UI later, but we had that placeholder, and it was just a matter of maybe the product manager or the analyst, the business analyst, to go and update that documentation. But we quickly found that people just adopted it as part of their normal cycle of developing data products. So that was great, and that was absolutely shifting left, building out that tooling just to make that life cycle a little bit easier, and creating that feedback loop between the data producers or the data product engineers and then the end users who could provide feedback around descriptions or ownership or whatever it might be.
We also see a lot of folks annotating schemas like protobuf schemas or arrow schemas, and essentially having those get checked in along with just the schema language itself. And then when those schemas gets pushed to production, essentially having those data set definitions essentially get registered into Data Hub. And I think you guys were also probably one of the first teams to be doing that, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, back at Expedia, we did that. We had it was very much a top-down initiative to tag everything, all of our resources. And that actually, was painful at the time, but looking back was definitely the right thing to do, because we did get excellent cost management across a very, very broad cloud platform. But it also allowed us then, to tag all of our data early on in the pipeline and propagate those tags, throughout the entire platform. And we're beginning to do that at OVO as well. So we're looking We work more on the Google Cloud platform, but we're looking to, again, shift left, do our tagging upstream, and then propagate tags partly for discovery and understanding what are the reliable data sets, but also now looking at classifications and then tying our access controls to policy tags so that we can do more granular access management or identity and access management without having to replicate data into sort of different zones of security, which is, wasteful and expensive at the end of the day.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, this is the month of propagation for us. So, at the town hall later this month, we are going to be talking about everything that we can do with propagation all the way within the platform as well as back out to external systems. So, our vision really here is of having Data Hub be that control plane for all of your data systems. You register logical specifications to us, and then we manage essentially how those pieces of information or configuration specifications travel and get pushed down, as you called it, right, into your platforms. So we talked about a bunch of problems that are similar or almost the same across these different verticals, discovery, quality, observability, governance, measuring ROI, a little bit about the tension between centralization and decentralization, and finally about how shift left principles and API first principles really set you up for success in whatever big data culture change you're embarking on, because it kind of pairs very nicely with decentralization efforts. So let's maybe talk just a little bit about what's different. I know we talked a little bit about it in terms of how the businesses were different. So maybe tell us about like what problems were distinct and how they impacted how data was done.
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I think a lot of it is, it's factors into partly the scale of the different organizations. Expedia is a global multinational company competing for businesses, again, sort of at that transactional, that booking level, with a vast number of domains where they host their websites. So you can imagine clickstream coming from, I think, literally 100 to enable, the sort of product analytics. And OVO Energy is a little bit different because we don't, which we obviously do, isn't perhaps so ingrained in how we do it and do everything around analytics. We do an enormous amount around, for example, customer lifetime value. Again, we're on more of a subscription model, looking at customer churn and looking at pricing, competing within a relatively, I suppose, closed market in a way. It's very industry regulated. So there are some differences in really how we do business, and that kind of translates to some of the challenges we have around data. There are still, while there are differences, particularly around scale, there are some commonalities there. We at OVO Energy deal with different sources of data for a similar domain. Partly, that's partly due to some of the acquisitions we made, all the different businesses that we run. I mentioned at the beginning, we're doing work around solar panels and EV charging and air source heat pumps and smart thermostats. So we have these different sources of data compared to a more traditional energy business. But at Expedia, with all this complexity, you would have take one domain and it might have, tens of different sources of that same data, which needs to be worked on. I think there's also, realistically, differences in where we are on that maybe maturity curve. Expedia being very large organization could spend quite a lot of money on investing in platforms, in data teams embedded within the domains. Within OVO Energy, I think someone recently described us as small but mighty. We have a small but very focused data team, and we're really more, I would say, feature-led or opportunity-led. And also, as we're very close to that realization process around the value that we bring, we tend to be more feature-led, I suppose. But with the product discipline we have, we're looking for adjacent opportunities for anything we develop. And again, anything we can push down to that platform for reuse. So yeah, definitely differences. I think a lot of it comes from scale and how we operate. I think possibly the other difference is we are more closely aligned with what we're doing around machine learning, AI, advanced analytics in that piece. So, again, very close to that opportunity compared to sort of perhaps what this large organization we had at Expedia.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that. In fact, I felt the same way when I went from, LinkedIn, which was a very big company with a lot of like specialization and a lot of heft behind each individual specialization. So, data infrastructure was a whole different team. Big data platforms, whole different team. AI, very different team. And, the contracts between those teams were, primarily around not so much APIs, but more like services. And so there was a lot more platformization that was needed across teams, the bigger you are. And, of course, now as Acryl, we also think of ourselves as a small but mighty startup that's, building one of the widest adopted, metadata platforms. And at the same time, also building a commercial product that essentially tries to drive these opinionated experiences and achieves kind of this control plane vision for our customers. So, we've talked about some of the tools you're using in your journey. Obviously, Data Hub at Expedia and, Data Hub Cloud at OVO. You also mentioned that you've got like multi-cloud setups going on, or perhaps you've gone from AWS at Expedia to GCP at OVO. So in terms of how you think about as a data product manager, choosing a tool set that allows you to work with these different cloud platforms, like what has your experience been there?
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic. So yes, Expedia very much primarily an AWS platform. OVO for data, very much a GCP platform. The difference is, as I'm sure most of the listeners will be aware, is AWS is very much more of an infrastructure provider. You need to build your platform on top of that. So there are a lot more things you can tune across AWS, but equally you need to invest in that. As an organization, you need to be prepared to, tweak and tune and manage all of that. And if things do go wrong, they can go wrong in probably not great ways. Google offers much more of a platform experience, and I do think that Google has a very good understanding of the analyst or data scientist journey. It is pretty joined up. It works very well for us. We don't really want to rely too much on building our infrastructure, the configuration and management. Yes, absolutely, we do. We want to be actively doing that, developing the right patterns there. But yeah, it is a different environment to be working with. I would say my role when I was working with Expedia was very technical. I probably know more about big data compute engines than I ever really wanted to learn about. And now I'm much more, with the work we're doing, we're much more, I think, outcome focused. We can rely on the platform doing a lot of that heavy lifting. Don't have to worry quite so much around how many nodes do we need to scale out on our query engine in order to satisfy demand at the end of the day in a particular time zone. So different, still fascinating, but yeah, slightly different problems to be solving now.
Cool. So we took a tour of your journey, talked about what things were different, what things are about the same. Hopefully the audience is kind of resonating with some of it. Maybe your journeys have been similar to Max's or different. Please, feel free to let us know in the comments what industries you are from and what kind of journeys you've seen or are seeing in your current jobs. Being a data product manager is a tough problem, and so if there are any data product managers in the audience, feel free to connect with Max or share what problems you're dealing with. So let's talk a little bit about the future now. So what are the new trends that are shaping your work today, and as you look towards the next 6 to 12 months? You talked a little bit about this platformization that's happening and the ability for working with platforms and actually building out that control plane style experience, but tell us a little more about where you're going with all of your next few months with both data management and AI.
Yeah, I think we can't really have a conversation nowadays without talking about AI or large language models or generative AI in particular. And
We
that's,
went 20
I mean,
minutes without talking about
we
AI.
did in 20 minutes. I thought that was pretty good. That's obviously a large area of focus. It's something I've been working in detail with around, I guess, probably for the last 12 months, 11 to 12 months. I am struggling to keep up with all the papers being published and all the developments. It does remind me a little bit of around, I don't know, 2015, 17, the explosion in data technologies from all these different companies. Matt Turk's data and AI landscape, something we all probably still follow. And I think there are some distinct challenges in this area. So large language models, obviously, we're talking about language, we're talking about unstructured data. In my experience, which could be narrow, probably other listeners may have different experiences around it, is unstructured data hasn't had the focus around quality, metadata, that kind of data product robustness you get from more, should we say, commonly used data sets within an organization. So I think there's that, is that suddenly you've got these very exciting projects to spin up, probably a lot of leadership focus on looking for results around this, and then finding that age-old problem of actually your data is not quite as good as you'd hoped it was going to be. And there are also challenges between, I think, unstructured data and structured data. So when you think about metadata around structured data, you're typically talking around a table, maybe a message on the stream, but mostly around that sort of a table, understanding what metadata looks around that. With unstructured data, I think you're seeing it more at the row level. So thinking about transcripts at the message or the conversation level or at the document level. And that's really important to understand as inputs into AI. You also want to understand provenance, lineage, where's that data come from, how reliable it is. Much more difficult to test for reliability of unstructured data than it is for structured data. And again, so I think inherent challenges around that. But I think there's also a great opportunity here to actually use large language models to help us with this. Large language models are good at languages. So if you do have that, these large amounts of text you want to analyze, you can use LLMs in kind of as a discriminator or to categorize your data, look for and pull out specific information in vast amounts of data, generate that metadata, which can then help inform you going forward. So that's definitely something which I think is very exciting. There's a lot of developments in the community and industry in this area.
So metadata for AI and AI for metadata.
Yeah, absolutely. And then not forgetting all the metadata the AIs will be generating. And again, this becomes more of less of a generative AI specific issue, more of an AI problem, AI opportunity, should we say. So you run a model, you want to be able to evaluate it, have a score. If you develop a new version of that model, you need to know, is this better than my previous model or is it not as good as the previous model? And how you're going to determine that and store that information. With the generative AI side of things, it gets a little bit more complicated because you've also got the prompt, you've got the large language model itself, and these are inherently non-deterministic. So small changes could have a big impact. And now we're seeing this emergence of the so-called agentic workflows, where you have almost a graph or a collection of AIs working together to solve a particular problem. So you will have within one, say, problem space, multiple AIs, multiple versions of models, multiple versions of prompts, making API calls, pulling information in, collating it, possibly a council of experts deciding which is the best result. All of that you need to be able to monitor to answer, questions like, is this better than my previous version? And that's what we need to capture that information, store that in, a meta model of some form in order to be able to record that. And, I think that's where Data Hub can play a really exciting a part of that solution with the meta model and the sort of the natural extensibility of the model.
Yeah, I think we've in a strange way, there's a little bit of foreshadowing that happens in some of these bigger tech companies where we accidentally solve problems in a way organically that, 5 years or 10 years later, the rest of the industry finally converges to that being a good pattern. And I kind of accidentally stepped into this problem of LinkedIn was having some challenges with just productivity of ML engineers, and I'm talking about classic ML engineers. We were doing GNNs, of course, and logistic regression and all of the usual bag of tricks. And one of the biggest problems started to become a combination of are we even using the right features to train and build our models? But secondly, as we are running thousands and thousands of experiments on the site, how do we know which models are working well, and how do we make sure that they were trained on the right data, and can we actually go back? And sometimes in large organizations, principled technical decisions are hard because there are teams, they have autonomy, and they have the flexibility to go make the decision they want. But I was really lucky to have really strong engineering counterparts there, where they basically came to me as the metadata platform lead and said, you know what, we should just have a single metadata platform that supports both data provenance, data lineage, as well as ML model provenance and ML model lineage. And so we ended up building essentially a common substrate that powered our AI ops capabilities as well. And I'm seeing that trend happen also in our customers now, and also in the Data Hub community. And so I'm really excited about that kind of future for platforms like Data Hub. So we're already in kind of further into the future. So what are the things in the future that you're really excited about beyond kind of this pushing down capabilities into data platforms and kind of making AI metadata more accessible and more discoverable for everyone? And if folks have questions about kind of this area or trends in this area, feel free to drop it in, and Max and I will get to them as soon as we wrap up our conversation. So Max, take us home with kind of your predictions for the future.
So yeah, predictions for the future, I think, is just inherently difficult right at the moment with the pace of change around generative AI. It's I've been thinking about our strategy. Every time I think about something, 2 or 3 years, this would be something we need to be focusing on. I think, well, what would it take for a company to build an AI which can kind of solve this? And I'm not talking about taking away people's jobs. I'm talking about things working differently because we have this power of understanding language through generative AI and potentially these agentic workflows. So the thing that's kind of fascinating me at the moment is really being a bit of an observer around the whole Gen AI product landscape. Obviously, you have these big foundational organizations, OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, Cohere, all of these, Meta, of course, all of these companies building out this core capabilities. And I think we're seeing an explosion of peripheral products and capabilities around this, and then we're going to see those real products built with this AI at the core. And I'm not entirely sure what those are all going to be, but I think it's going to be a very exciting time. And of course, this is all underpinned by data. Getting that data right, the training data which goes into these things to make sure that these capabilities are safe, unbiased, non-discriminatory, is a challenge. You're working on vast amounts of data. So yes, these are problems that these large foundational organizations are doing, but as a smaller company taking advantage of this, maybe using techniques like fine-tuning or retrieval augmented generation, you need to make that sure that your data is safe, reliable, and all the other good, I think, data due diligence that we have learned from, and we might need to relearn a little bit for structured data and the specific challenges that brings. But I'm an AI optimist, not an AI pessimist. So I'm excited about the future.
I'm super excited as well because it just creates a ton of metadata opportunities, and there's a lot that metadata can do for AI to actually supercharge, to not to overuse a cliche term, but to really supercharge the productivity of AI engineers and make sure that we can actually bring a lot of these applications to production, which I think is still one of the hardest problems that I see companies struggle with. Like, you've got 10, 50 people playing around with models and building cute chatbots on the side, but it's a very different experience when you finally put it live and you're like, okay, this is the production thing and it's actually working, and to keep your hands off of it and to let kind of the automation take over. It is there's still a lot of training wheels needed as that practice matures. It's been great having you on the show, Max. We've talked about everything from cheese making to data generation in the Hadoop days to being able to generate models in the LLM age, and how metadata is kind of the common thread tying a lot of this together, but also how there's a lot of new opportunities and a lot of new challenges for projects and products like Data Hub. So super excited for what the future holds for all of us. And for the audience, please feel free to drop in more comments and questions, and we'll get to them. We'll be around taking a few more questions as this show wraps up. Thanks a lot, Max. And we'll see you around.
Thank you very much, Shashank. Bye-bye.